Hey there, folks. Thanks for joining me today as we dive into a tale that's equal parts wild, satisfying, and just a little bit messy. This is The Well of Retribution, a story about a man defending what's his against a neighbor who thought she could take whatever she wanted. It's a saga of stolen water, cunning revenge, and a community that finally stood up to a tyrant. Think of it as a rural showdown where the weapon of choice isn't a fist or a gun. It's a hose full of sludge. So, grab a drink, settle in, and let's get to the heart of this backyard battle that left an entire neighborhood buzzing. It all started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the air smells like dew and the sun hasn't quite decided if it's going to burn you or just tease you. I was standing at my bathroom sink, toothbrush in hand, when the water from the faucet did something it had never done before. It sputtered, like an old car choking on bad gas, then wheezed a pathetic gurgle before the stream turned the color of dishwater left to sit for a week. Not murky, not rusty, but this sickly gray-brown that looked like it had been scraped from the bottom of a forgotten bucket. And the smell, God, the smell. It wasn't the usual sulfur tang you sometimes get with well water, nor the chemical bite of chlorine. This was something else, something primal, like a dead thing had curled up in the pipes and decided to haunt me through the faucet. I gagged, spat a mouthful of toothpaste foam into the sink, and stared at the drain, half expecting something to crawl out of it. My stomach churned, not just from the stench, but from the confusion. What the hell was going on? I turned off the tap and stood there, toothbrush still dripping, trying to make sense of it. My house sits on the edge of town, where the county line blurs into open fields and horse trails. Out here, you're your own utility company. No city water, no shared lines, just you, your well, and whatever system you've rigged to keep the lights on and the taps running. I'd built my water system from scratch years ago, back when I bought this patch of land with dreams of quiet evenings and no one telling me how to live. It wasn't just a pump and a pipe. It was a whole setup, sourced from a deep well, filtered twice through charcoal and UV, routed through buried lines to a backup tank for dry seasons. I'd sunk thousands into it, not to mention countless weekends crawling through dirt to lay pipe or troubleshoot leaks. It was mine, every inch of it, and it had never failed me. Not once. So why was my water looking like it belonged in a swamp? I grabbed a glass from the kitchen and turned on the tap there, hoping it was just the bathroom acting up. Same story, sputter, wheeze, gray sludge. The smell hit me again, and I nearly dropped the glass. I shut off the valve under the sink, my mind racing. Maybe a pipe had burst. Maybe the well had been contaminated by runoff from the fields nearby. Or maybe the filter system had finally given out after years of faithful service. I wasn't an expert, but I knew enough to start checking. I headed to the barn where I kept my tools and the main control panel for the water system. The gauges looked normal, pressure steady, no obvious leaks. I opened the inspection hatch on the primary filter and found it clean, no clogs, no buildup. Everything checked out. But that smell lingered in my nose, mocking me. Then the mail arrived. I wasn't expecting much, just the usual bills and junk flyers. But when I opened the envelope from the water testing company, my heart sank. I paid them quarterly to monitor my well for contaminants, mostly to keep the county off my back. The bill was usually a flat $80, maybe $100 if they had to run extra tests. This time, $287. Triple the usual. No explanation. No itemized list, just a number that hit like a punch. I sat on the porch, staring at the paper, trying to connect the dots. Dirty water. Skyrocketing bill. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just bad luck. My gut churned with a feeling I couldn't shake, like I was being played, like someone or something was messing with what I'd built. I took a deep breath and walked the perimeter of my property, checking the exposed sections of pipe that ran from the well to the house. Nothing looked tampered with. No cuts, no loose fittings. But as I got closer to the fence line that separated my land from my neighbors, I heard it. A faint hum, barely audible over the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind through the tall grass. It was the sound of a pump, not mine, running somewhere it had no business being. I knelt by the fence, pressed my hand to the dirt, and felt a subtle vibration, like the ground itself was whispering a secret. That's when I knew. This wasn't a broken valve or a clogged filter. Someone was pulling water from my system, and they were doing it hard. My neighbor, the one on the other side of that fence, was a woman named Evelyn. Out here, Where houses are spread thin and everyone keeps to themselves, you don't always know your neighbors well. But Evelyn, everyone knew Evelyn. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed empress of the local homeowners association, even though my property sat just outside their jurisdiction. Her newsletters, printed on glossy paper like they were royal decrees, showed up in my mailbox every week, addressed to resident, in bold, accusatory font. She'd once sent me a letter complaining that my barn's red paint clashed with the community aesthetic. I'd laughed it off, thinking she was just a busybody with too much time. But now, standing by that fence, feeling the pulse of a pump that shouldn't be there, I wasn't laughing anymore. I went back inside, grabbed a notebook, and started jotting down what I knew. Dirty water. High bill. Strange pump noise. Evelyn's fence line. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me pay attention. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions or start a fight without proof, but I'd be damned if I let someone leech off what I'd worked so hard to build. Out here, your land, your water, your labor, they're everything. And if Evelyn thought she could help herself to mine, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would turn my quiet corner of the world into a stage for one of the most satisfying acts of retribution I'd ever pull off. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of that phantom pump kept echoing in my head, like a mosquito buzzing just out of swatting range. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the moonlight slicing through the blinds in thin, silver strips. My house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood, but my mind was anything but. The water issue, the bill, the vibration in the dirt, it all pointed to something deliberate, something sneaky. I wasn't a paranoid guy, but out here, where trust was earned through years of shared fence lines and borrowed tools, the idea of someone tampering with my system felt like a betrayal. I rolled over, checked the clock. 1:47 a.m. Sleep wasn't coming, so I threw on a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of sagebrush and distant hayfields. My boots crunched on the gravel as I made my way to the fence line, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the ground. I didn't expect to catch anyone red-handed, not at this hour, but I needed to see if I could pinpoint that hum. I knelt by the fence again, the wooden posts weathered and splintered from years of sun and wind. The sound was fainter now, almost swallowed by the rustle of leaves, but it was there, pulsing like a heartbeat. I pressed my ear to the ground, feeling a fool but driven by a need to know. The vibration was real, steady, coming from somewhere beyond Evelyn's property, maybe near her shed, which sat just 20 feet from our shared boundary. I stood, shining the flashlight across her yard. Her house was dark, curtains drawn, no sign of life. But that shed, it bugged me. It was one of those prefab metal things, too shiny for a place like this, with a padlock that looked more decorative than functional. I'd never paid it much mind before, but now it seemed suspicious, like a vault hiding secrets. I didn't cross the fence. Trespassing wasn't my style, but I walked the length of my property line, checking for any signs of tampering. Nothing obvious, no dug-up dirt, no exposed pipes. Still, the hum persisted, mocking my efforts to pin it down. Back inside, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, notebook open. I sketched a rough map of my water system, marking the well, the main line, the backup tank, and the fence. If someone was pulling water, they'd need access to a line, and the closest one to Evelyn's property was buried near my barn. Digging it up without me noticing would have been tough, but not impossible. I jotted down possibilities: a hidden tap, a siphon, maybe even a bypass rig to her own system. The thought made my blood boil. I'd spent years perfecting that setup, tweaking valves, calibrating filters, all to ensure clean water for my home. The idea of someone helping themselves to it felt like they'd reached into my chest and stolen a piece of my pride. The next morning, I called my buddy Tom, a retired plumber who'd helped me install the system years ago. He lived a few miles out, on a ranch with more goats than sense, but he knew pipes better than anyone. I explained the situation, the dirty water, the bill, the hum. He listened, chuckling at first, thinking I was overreacting, but when I mentioned the vibration, his tone shifted. "Sounds like a booster pump," he said. "Someone's pulling hard, probably at night to avoid notice. Check your pressure gauge after dark. If it drops when your taps are off, you've got a leach." He promised to swing by later in the week, but I wasn't waiting. I needed answers now. That evening, after a long day fixing a fence post and hauling feed for the neighbor's horses, I set up shop by the barn. I'd installed a pressure gauge years ago, a rancher's trick to catch leaks early. It was a simple dial, mounted on a pipe that fed the main line. I checked it at 7 p.m., 60 psi, normal for my system. I turned off every tap in the house, double-checked the irrigation, and waited. By 10 p.m., the gauge hadn't budged. I was starting to feel like a fool, chasing ghosts in the dirt, when I checked again at midnight. The needle had dropped to 45 psi. My heart raced. Something was pulling water, and it wasn't me. I grabbed my flashlight and headed back to the fence, the hum louder now, unmistakable. This time, I noticed something new, a faint trail in the grass on Evelyn's side, barely visible, like someone had walked the same path repeatedly. It led straight to her shed. I stood there, the night pressing in, my breath fogging in the cold. Evelyn's face flashed in my mind, her smug smile, her newsletters lecturing me about community standards. She'd always acted like she owned this stretch of land, HOA or not. Was she bold enough to steal my water? I didn't have proof, not yet, but the pieces were falling into place, and they all pointed to her. I went back to the house, my mind buzzing with plans. I wasn't going to confront her, not without evidence. Evelyn was the type to twist words, to play victim while slipping a knife in your back. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny. As I locked the door and turned off the lights, I made a promise to myself. I'd find out what she was doing, and when I did, she'd regret ever crossing that fence. The next day, I woke with a fire in my gut. The pressure drop, the hum, the trail to Evelyn's shed, they weren't coincidences. Someone was messing with my water, and I was done guessing. I needed proof, the kind that would hold up if this turned into a fight. Out here, disputes over water weren't just neighborly spats, they were blood feuds, fought with lawyers and county permits instead of guns. I wasn't looking for war, but I'd be ready if it came. I started at the barn, checking the pressure gauge again. It was back to 60 psi, as if nothing had happened. That told me the siphoning was happening at night, probably when Evelyn thought no one was watching. I spent the morning inspecting every inch of my system, crawling under the house to check for leaks, climbing into the well housing to test the pump. Everything was clean, no cracks, no corrosion. The filters were spotless, which made the dirty water even stranger. If the well itself was contaminated, the filters would have caught it. This was coming from somewhere else, somewhere downstream. I called Tom again, catching him mid-argument with one of his goats. He laughed when I told him about the pressure drop. "You're turning into a detective," he said. "Get a trail cam. Hide it near the fence. If someone's digging around, you'll catch him." It was a good idea, but I didn't have a camera on hand, and the nearest store was an hour's drive. Instead, I rigged a temporary setup, an old motion sensor light I'd used for coyotes, pointed at the fence line. If anyone crossed it, the yard would light up like a stadium. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That afternoon, I drove to the feed store to pick up some fittings for a backup plan I was forming. While there, I ran into Clara, an old-timer who'd lived out here longer than most. She was buying chicken wire and complaining about the price of grain. I mentioned the water issue, keeping it vague, but her eyes narrowed. "You check your lines?" she asked. "Had a guy down the road a few years back. Thought his well was dry. Turned out his neighbor was tapping it for a damn koi pond." I froze. A koi pond. Evelyn had one, a gaudy thing she'd bragged about at a block party last summer. Clara's story stuck with me, fueling my suspicion. Back home, I ordered a trail camera online, paying extra for overnight shipping. It was a small unit, disguised as a rock, with night vision and a 32 gigabytes card. While I waited for it to arrive, I kept monitoring the gauge. For 2 more nights, the pattern held, normal pressure until around 1 a.m., then it dropped to 40 or 45 psi. Each time, I'd hear the hum, fainter some nights but always there. I started marking the times in my notebook, building a log. It felt obsessive, but I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about water anymore. It was about control, about someone thinking they could take what was mine and laugh while doing it. The camera arrived the next day, and I spent the evening setting it up. I chose a spot near the barn, tucked behind a pile of old fence posts, with a clear view of the fence and Evelyn's shed. I tested it, waving my hand in front of the lens, then checked the footage on my phone. Crystal clear, even in the dark. I felt a surge of satisfaction, like a hunter setting a trap. If Evelyn or her people were sneaking around, I'd have them on tape. That night, I barely slept, checking my phone every hour for alerts from the camera. Nothing triggered, But the pressure dropped again, this time to 42 psi. I was tempted to storm over to Evelyn's and demand answers, but I held back. She'd deny everything, and I'd look like the crazy one. Instead, I started noticing other signs. Her lawn was impossibly green, despite the county's drought warnings. Her sprinklers ran every evening, a steady hiss I could hear from my porch. And that koi pond, every time I passed her gate, I saw it sparkling, the fish darting through water that looked too clean for a dry season. I decided to dig deeper into Evelyn's world. I pulled up her HOA newsletters, stacked in a drawer I used for kindling. They were full of her usual nonsense, rules about fence heights, complaints about unmowed lawns, but one caught my eye. A month ago, she'd announced a community beautification project, complete with new landscaping and a water feature enhancement. No details, just vague promises of a better neighborhood. I scoffed. Was my water paying for her paradise? The thought made my skin crawl. By the third night with the camera, I had my first hit. At 2:03 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app, heart pounding, and watched the grainy footage. A figure moved across Evelyn's yard, flashlight in hand, heading straight for the shed. They were quick, purposeful, carrying something long and cylindrical, pipe, maybe. They disappeared behind the shed for 15 minutes, then reemerged, empty-handed, and slipped back toward her house. I couldn't see their face, but I didn't need to. This was no random thief. This was someone working for Evelyn, and they were rigging my system right under my nose. The footage was a game changer, but it wasn't enough. A blurry figure with a flashlight didn't prove Evelyn was behind it, and I wasn't about to accuse her without a smoking gun. She was too slippery, the kind of person who'd turn tears on like a faucet and have half the neighborhood feeling sorry for her. I saved the video, backed it up to a USB drive, and spent the morning replaying it, zooming in on every frame. The figure's build suggested a man, stocky, with a slight limp. I didn't know Evelyn's inner circle well, but I had a hunch. Her handyman, Ray. I'd seen him around, a quiet guy in his 50s who drove a beat-up truck and fixed fences for half the HOA. He'd once offered to upgrade my irrigation for a price that screamed scam. I'd said no, but Evelyn clearly hadn't. I needed more evidence, so I doubled down. I ordered 2 more trail cameras, setting them at different angles, one near the fence, hidden in a juniper bush, and another by the barn, aimed at my main line. I also started logging water usage manually, noting every time I ran the dishwasher or watered the garden. If the pressure drops didn't match my usage, I'd know exactly how much was being stolen. It was tedious, but it gave me control, something to anchor me as my anger grew. Every time I thought about Evelyn's lush lawn, her sparkling pond, her smug newsletters, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just theft, it was disrespect, a middle finger to everything I'd built. That afternoon, I took a walk past Evelyn's gate, casual as could be, pretending to check my mailbox. Her yard was a showpiece, roses in full bloom, grass so green it looked painted, and that damn koi pond, bubbling like a resort fountain. I noticed something new, a small stone fountain near her patio, water cascading over polished rocks. It wasn't there last month. I clenched my fists, forcing a smile as her gardener waved from the driveway. How much of my water was feeding this nonsense? I wanted to kick the fountain over, but I kept walking, my mind spinning with plans. Back home, I dug into Evelyn's history. I wasn't a hacker, but I knew how to use the county's public records site. Her property was a half-acre, zoned for residential use, with no registered well or secondary water source. She relied on a county hookup, which was metered and expensive, especially in a drought. Yet her water bill, according to a neighbor who'd complained at a barbecue, was suspiciously low. It didn't add up. Either she was bribing someone at the utility office, or she was getting water elsewhere. Like from me. The cameras paid off 2 nights later. At 1:56 a.m., another alert. This time, the footage was clearer. The same stocky figure, same limp, carrying a toolbox to the shed. He knelt by the ground, fiddling with something, a valve, maybe, then left after 10 minutes. The second camera caught a partial view of his face as he passed under a streetlight. It was Ray, no question. I froze the frame, my pulse racing. Evelyn wasn't just involved, she was orchestrating this, using Ray as her grunt. I imagined her sitting in her air-conditioned living room, sipping wine, while Ray did her dirty work. The thought made me want to march over and rip her fountain out with my bare hands. Instead, I kept building my case. I started noticing smaller signs of Evelyn's overreach. Her newsletters had grown bolder, demanding voluntary contributions for HOA projects, even from non-members like me. She'd parked a new SUV in her driveway, its chrome rims gleaming like a trophy. And at night, her sprinklers ran longer than anyone else's, a steady drone that felt like a taunt. I began talking to neighbors, subtly, over coffee or at the feed store. Most didn't like Evelyn but tolerated her because she ran the HOA like a dictator. One guy, Mike, mentioned she'd pressured him to share his compost pile for her garden, claiming it was for the community. Another, Sarah, said Evelyn had reported her for leaving a tricycle in the yard. The more I heard, the clearer it became. Evelyn didn't just want my water. She wanted control, and I was just collateral damage. I decided to test her. I shut off my main valve for a night, locking it with a padlock I'd bought for the occasion. If she was tapping my line, she'd notice. The next morning, her sprinklers didn't run. Her lawn looked parched by noon, the first time I'd seen it less than perfect. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as she stormed out, phone in hand, yelling at someone, Ray, probably. It was a small victory, but it confirmed everything. She was hooked into my system, and she was desperate to keep it flowing. With Ray on camera and Evelyn's sprinklers betraying her, I had enough to confront her, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted the full picture, every detail of how deep this theft went. I wasn't just fighting for my water. I was fighting for principle, for the right to keep what I'd earned. Evelyn's entitlement had infected the neighborhood, and I needed evidence so airtight she'd choke on her own excuses. So, I kept watching, kept logging, kept building my case like a lawyer preparing for a trial. The cameras were now a nightly ritual. I'd check the footage each morning, coffee in hand, like I was reviewing game tapes. Over the next week, I caught Ray 3 more times, always between 1 and 3 a.m., always tinkering by the shed. One night, he dragged a hose from the shed to her koi pond, filling it under the cover of darkness. Another time, he connected a splitter to what I now knew was an illegal tap, routing water to her new fountain. The footage was gold, but it also infuriated me. Every gallon he siphoned was money out of my pocket, or on my system, a violation of my trust. I started documenting Evelyn's water usage in real time. Her sprinklers ran for hours, sometimes during the day, a blatant middle finger to the county's rationing rules. Her koi pond bubbled constantly, the pump humming like a taunt. And that fountain, it was her pride and joy, featured in her latest newsletter with a photo of her posing beside it, captioned, "Elevating our community's charm." I nearly crushed the paper in my fist. Elevating, my ass. She was draining my well to play queen. I decided to quantify the theft. Using my pressure logs and some rough math, I estimated she was pulling at least 500 gallons a day, maybe more on weekends when she hosted her HOA brunches. Those events were legendary, not for fun but for excess. I'd seen them from my porch, tables draped in white linen, pitchers of lemonade, a dozen women in sundresses gossiping while sprinklers misted the lawn. Last Sunday, she'd added a bounce house for her grandkids, its water slide gleaming in the sun. I checked the gauge that night, a 20 psi drop, the biggest yet. She wasn't just stealing, she was throwing a parade with my resources. To confirm, I set up a 4th camera, this one aimed at her backyard from a tree on my property. It was risky, technically legal, but Evelyn would scream invasion of privacy if she found it. I didn't care. The footage was worth it. Over 3 days, I captured her hosting 2 brunches, a garden club meeting, and a charity car wash that was just her and her friends hosing down their SUVs. The water flowed freely, spraying everywhere, while she laughed and waved the hose like a scepter. I watched it all on my phone, my jaw tight, my coffee going cold. This wasn't a mistake or a one-time grab. It was a system, a lifestyle, built on my dime. I started talking to more neighbors, fishing for clues. Most were tight-lipped, scared of Evelyn's wrath, but a few opened up. Mike, the compost guy, said she'd tried to borrow his generator during a power outage, then kept it for a week. Sarah, the tricycle mom, admitted Evelyn had fined her $50 for clutter, then used the money for HOA beautification. The pattern was clear. Evelyn took what she wanted, cloaked it in community good, and dared anyone to call her out. I wasn't just fighting for water. I was fighting a mindset, one that saw boundaries as suggestions. My anger wasn't just about the theft anymore. It was about her arrogance, her belief that she could bend the world to her will. I'd built my system with sweat and sacrifice, every pipe a testament to my independence. Evelyn didn't just steal water. She stole my peace, my pride, my sense of fairness. I lay awake at night, imagining her smug face, her perfect lawn, her fake tears when confronted. I wanted to storm over, rip out her tap, and watch her squirm. But I knew better. She'd turn it into a circus, paint me as the villain. I needed a plan that hit harder, something she couldn't spin. That's when I remembered the old stock tank behind the barn. It was a rusty relic, half filled with runoff from last season's rains, thick with algae and cow manure from when I'd helped a neighbor with his herd. It stank worse than my faucet had, a bubbling stew of nature's worst. I stared at it, a slow grin spreading across my face. If Evelyn wanted my water so badly, maybe it was time she got a taste of something else. Not yet, though. I needed more proof, more footage, more nails for her coffin. But the seed was planted, and it was growing fast. I had enough footage to bury Evelyn, but I wanted to give her a chance to come clean. Maybe it was naive, but part of me hoped she'd admit it, maybe even apologize. I wasn't holding my breath, but I needed to see her reaction, to gauge how far she'd go to protect her lie. So, I burned the best clips onto a USB drive, Ray at the shed, the hose to the pond, the car wash, and printed a still of Ray's face, clear as day. I tucked it all into a manila envelope, grabbed my hat, and walked to her house. It was late afternoon, the sun low, casting long shadows across her perfect lawn. Her sprinklers were off, but the grass glistened, mocking me with every step. I knocked on her door, 3 sharp raps, and waited. The house was quiet, but I saw a curtain twitch. She was home. After a long pause, the door opened, and there she was, Evelyn, in a crisp white blouse, her hair pulled back, her smile so polished it could have sold toothpaste. "Well, hello," she chirped, like we were old friends. "What brings you here?" I kept my voice steady, my face neutral. "I've got a problem, Evelyn. I think someone's tapped into my water line. Got some footage I'd like you to see." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered, just for a second, like a snake sizing up prey. She tilted her head, all innocence. "Oh, that sounds serious. But I'm sure it's a mistake. Why don't you come in?" I shook my head, holding up the envelope. "No need. Just take a look at this." I handed it over, watching her manicured nails close around it. She opened the envelope, glanced at the photo, and her smile tightened. She didn't touch the USB drive, just held the envelope like it might bite. "This is interesting," she said, her voice syrupy. "But I don't know anything about your water. Maybe it's a county issue. Have you called them?" I leaned forward, just enough to make her flinch. "It's not the county, Evelyn. It's coming from your side of the fence. I've got timestamps, pressure logs, video. Want to watch it together?" Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Then she laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You must be mistaken. I have my own water. This is ridiculous." She shoved the envelope back at me and slammed the door, cutting me off mid-sentence. I stood there, the envelope crumpled in my hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. That laugh, that dismissal, it wasn't just denial. It was defiance, a dare to prove her wrong. I walked back home, the setting sun burning my neck, my mind replaying every word. She hadn't even looked at the USB. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she thought I'd back down. That was her mistake. Back at the house, I tossed the envelope on the table and cracked open a beer. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage. I'd given her an out, and she'd spat in my face. I thought about calling the sheriff, but what would I say? My neighbors stealing water? They'd laugh me off without hard proof tying it directly to her. Small claims court was an option, but it was slow, and Evelyn would bury me in paperwork. The HOA was useless. I wasn't even a member. I needed something sharper, something that hit her where it hurt. Her pride, her image, her precious control. I sat by the window, staring at her house, its lights glowing like a smug beacon. That's when the stock tank idea came back, stronger this time. I pictured her fountain spewing sludge, her lawn coated in muck, her perfect brunches ruined. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice, a mirror held up to her greed. But I couldn't rush it. I needed to be sure, to cover every angle. I pulled out my notebook and started planning. More cameras, more logs, maybe a dye test to trace the water. I'd build a case so tight she'd have no way out. That night, I checked the cameras again. Ray was back, this time with a shovel, digging near the shed. He worked fast, covering his tracks, but the camera caught it all. I smiled, a cold, hard smile. Evelyn thought she was untouchable, but I was closing in. She'd pushed me too far, and now she was going to learn what happens when you mess with a man who builds things for a living. Evelyn's door slam echoed in my head for days, fueling a fire I hadn't felt in years. Her laugh, her fake innocence, it wasn't just personal. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at my feet. I wasn't going to let her win, not when she was draining my well and my wallet to fuel her ego. The stock tank idea was no longer a fleeting thought. It was a blueprint, a promise. But pulling it off would take more than a bad attitude and a rusty tank. I needed precision, timing, and a touch of madness. I spent the next morning inspecting the stock tank. It was worse than I remembered, a metal beast caked in rust, filled with a greenish-brown slurry that smelled like a barnyard after a flood. I poked it with a stick, and the surface rippled, revealing clumps of algae and something that might have been a dead frog. Perfect. If Evelyn wanted my water, she'd get this instead, a custom blend of rural karma. But rerouting the line was no small task. My system was buried deep, designed to withstand freezes and curious critters. Digging it up, redirecting it to the tank, and keeping it hidden from Evelyn's prying eyes would take work, and I couldn't do it alone. I called Tom, the plumber, and laid out the plan over beers at his place. He listened, stroking his beard, his eyes widening as I described the sludge. "You're insane," he said, laughing so hard he nearly spilled his drink. "But I'm in. She's been a thorn in everyone's side for years." Tom wasn't just a plumber. He was a tinkerer, the kind of guy who could rig a sprinkler to shoot chocolate syrup if you asked. He agreed to help, but only if we did it right. No leaks, no traces, no way for Evelyn to pin it back on us. We spent the evening sketching the setup. The illegal tap was near her shed, connected to a shallow line I hadn't noticed before, probably spliced in by Ray during one of his midnight runs. We'd dig up my side of the line, install a valve to switch between the clean well and the stock tank, and reroute her tap to pull from the tank when I flipped the switch. It was overkill, a plumber's fever dream, but it needed to be flawless. Evelyn would smell a setup if we left a single clue. To cover our tracks, we decided to work at night, using tarps to hide the dirt and battery-powered lanterns to avoid drawing attention. Tom suggested adding a dye to the tank water, non-toxic, but bright enough to show up in her fountain. "Make it neon green," he said, grinning. Let her explain that to her HOA cronies. I loved it, but I held off. The sludge was enough for now. Dye could come later if she didn't learn her lesson. I spent the next day gathering supplies: a heavy-duty valve, extra PVC pipe, a shovel with a quiet blade, and a roll of black tarp. I also upgraded my cameras, adding a fifth one with audio to catch any conversations near the shed. My obsession was growing, but so was my resolve. Every time I saw Evelyn's car roll by, her windows tinted like she was royalty, I felt a surge of determination. She wasn't just stealing water, she was stealing my peace, and I was taking it back. That night, I tested the pressure again. Another drop, this time to 38 psi, the lowest yet. I checked the cameras and caught Ray hooking up a new hose, this one thicker, probably to feed her latest project, a misting system for her patio, according to her newsletter. The audacity floored me. She wasn't slowing down, she was doubling down, confident I'd never catch her. I sat in the dark, watching the footage, my hands clenched around my phone. The valve plan wasn't just a prank anymore. It was a necessity, a line in the sand. I met Tom the next evening at his place to finalize details. His wife, Linda, overheard us and chimed in, half joking, "You boys better not get arrested." She'd had her own run-in with Evelyn, who'd tried to fine her for planting wildflowers instead of approved shrubs. Linda's story reminded me how deep Evelyn's control ran, how she'd bullied the neighborhood into submission. This wasn't just my fight, it was a reckoning for everyone she'd stepped on. As I drove home, the stock tank plan felt heavier, more real. I wasn't just protecting my water, I was exposing a tyrant. But doubt crept in. What if Evelyn turned this around? What if she sued, or worse, rallied the HOA to make my life hell? I pushed it aside. She crossed a line, and I was done playing nice. The sludge was coming, and it was going to hit her where it hurt most. The night we started digging felt like a heist. Tom showed up at 11 p.m., his truck loaded with tools and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake a corpse. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough to see by, which was perfect. We didn't want Evelyn or her nosy friend spotting us. We spread the tarp near the barn, set up the lanterns, and got to work. The ground was hard, packed from years of drought, and every shovelful felt like a battle. My arms burned, but the anger kept me going. Every scoop was a step closer to justice. Tom was all business, measuring the line with a tape, marking where we'd install the valve. "Gotta keep it clean," he muttered, slicing through dirt like a surgeon. We worked in shifts, one digging, the other watching for headlights or movement from Evelyn's side. The cameras were rolling, but I'd angled them to avoid catching us, just in case. The last thing I needed was my own footage used against me. Around 1 a.m., we hit the main line, a thick PVC pipe gleaming in the lantern light. Tom whistled. She tapped this? Ballsy. He pointed to a crude splice, barely sealed, where Ray had hooked in her line. It was sloppy, leaking just enough to explain the dirty water. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't just theft. It was sabotage, a hack job that could have wrecked my whole system. Tom patched the leak while I dug a trench for the new valve, a heavy brass beast that would let me switch between the well and the stock tank with a single turn. We took a break at 2:30, sitting on the tarp, passing the thermos. Tom told me about his own run-in with Evelyn years ago, when she'd tried to ban his goats for odor violations. He'd fought her in a county hearing and won, but it cost him weeks of stress. She's a vampire, he said, his voice low. Drains everyone around her. I nodded, thinking of the neighbors I'd talked to, their stories of fines and threats. This valve wasn't just for me, it was for them, too. We finished by 4 a.m., the valve installed, the tank line connected, and the dirt packed tight. Tom had rigged a camouflage cover, a wooden panel painted to blend with the ground, over the valve. Unless you knew where to look, you'd never find it. We tested it, flipping the switch to the tank. A gurgle, then a slow trickle of sludge oozed through a test hose. It stank worse than I'd imagined, like a sewer and a swamp had a baby. We both laughed, a quiet, conspiratorial sound. She's gonna lose her mind, Tom said, clapping my shoulder. Before we parted, I gave Tom a six-pack as thanks. He waved it off, but I insisted. You're in this now, I said. If it goes south, I'll take the heat. He grinned. South? This is gonna go nuclear. I drove him home, the adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. Back at my place, I checked the cameras. No alerts, no Ray, just the usual night sounds. I fell into bed, exhausted but wired, dreaming of Evelyn's face when the sludge hit. The next day, I acted normal, mowing the lawn, waving to neighbors. But inside, I was counting down. Evelyn's next brunch was Sunday, 3 days away, according to her newsletter. That's when I'd flip the valve, when her yard would be packed with her HOA minions, sipping mimosas and praising her greatness. I spent the wait fine-tuning the plan, checking the valve, cleaning the cameras, backing up footage. I also started a rumor, casual-like, at the feed store, mentioning weird water in the neighborhood. If Evelyn caught wind, she'd think it was her tap causing it, not me. It was a small jab, but it felt good. By Saturday, I was ready. The valve was primed, the tank full, the cameras charged. I sat on my porch, watching Evelyn's house, her sprinklers hissing like a snake. She had no idea what was coming, no clue that her empire was about to get a very dirty wake-up call. Sunday dawned bright and cruel, the kind of day made for Evelyn's brunches, clear skies, a light breeze, perfect for showing off her stolen paradise. I woke early, checked the valve one last time, and set up camp on my porch with a lawn chair, a thermos of coffee, and my phone queued to the camera feeds. The tank was ready, its sludge simmering like a witch's brew. I timed it perfectly. Her newsletter said the brunch started at 11 a.m., with special guests from the HOA board. I wanted maximum chaos, maximum witnesses. By 10:30, her yard was buzzing. Cars lined the street, women in pastel dresses clutching purses, men in polo shirts shaking hands. Evelyn flitted among them, her laugh carrying over the fence, grating on my nerves. Her sprinklers kicked on, misting the lawn, and I saw her point proudly at the fountain, its water sparkling. I checked the gauge. 55 psi. Steady. She was pulling my water right now, oblivious. I waited, letting her bask in her glory, letting her guests settle in. At 11:15, with the party in full swing, I walked to the barn, my heart pounding but my hands steady. I knelt by the hidden valve, took a deep breath, and turned it. A low gurgle echoed through the pipe, like the earth itself was chuckling. I hustled back to the porch, phone in hand, and watched the feeds. For a moment, nothing happened. The sprinklers hissed, the fountain bubbled, the guests sipped their drinks. Then it hit. The fountain was the first to go. Its clear stream turned murky, then erupted in a geyser of thick, greenish-brown sludge, spraying across the patio. Screams pierced the air as guests scattered, their dresses splattered, their drinks abandoned. The sprinklers followed, popping up like landmines, shooting arcs of muck that coated the lawn, the tables, the bounce house. Evelyn froze, her mouth open, as the koi pond began to cloud, fish darting in panic. One guest slipped, landing in a puddle of slime, while another retched into a rosebush. It was chaos, a cartoonish disaster, and I couldn't stop grinning. Evelyn ran to the sprinkler controls, slipping on the wet grass, her white skirt now streaked with filth. She fumbled with the shutoff, but the damage was done. Her yard was a swamp, her guests fleeing, some laughing hysterically, others cursing. I zoomed in on the camera, catching her face shock, then rage, then something like fear. She knew this wasn't random. She knew it was me. I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee, the satisfaction washing over me like a warm wave. This wasn't just revenge, it was art, a masterpiece of consequence painted in sludge. But I wasn't done. I flipped the valve back to the clean line, ensuring my system stayed pure, and waited for the fallout. Evelyn would come for me, I was sure of it, and I was ready. By noon, her guests were gone, the street empty except for a lone car with a splattered windshield. Evelyn stood in her yard, hose in hand, trying to wash away the mess, but every spray just spread the muck further. I watched, my phone recording, knowing this footage would be my shield if she tried to spin it. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control, like I'd taken back what was mine. But I also knew Evelyn. She wouldn't slink away quietly. She'd fight, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw next. The silence after the sludge explosion was eerie, like the calm before a storm you know is coming. Evelyn's yard, once a showcase, was a disaster zone. Tables overturned, chairs caked in muck, the koi pond a murky soup. I expected her to come pounding on my door within the hour, but she didn't. Instead, she spent the afternoon hosing down her patio, her movements frantic, her face a mask of fury. I watched from my window, camera rolling, knowing this was just the opening act. By evening, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. I got a text from Mike, the compost guy. Heard about Evelyn's party. What the hell happened? I played dumb, saying I'd seen the mess but didn't know much. I wasn't ready to tip my hand, not until I saw Evelyn's next move. She was too quiet, too still, and that worried me more than any tantrum. She was plotting, and I needed to stay one step ahead. The next morning she came. Not with a knock, but a bang, her fist hammering my door like she was serving a warrant. I opened it, coffee in hand, my face calm despite the adrenaline spiking through me. She was a sight, hair frazzled, eyes wild, her usual polish replaced by raw anger. You did this, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger. You poisoned my water, ruined my property, humiliated me. I raised an eyebrow, sipping my coffee. Poisoned? That's a strong word, Evelyn. Care to explain how I do that to your water? Her face twitched, caught off guard by my calm. She launched into a tirade, accusing me of sabotage, vandalism, even environmental terrorism. It was almost impressive, the way she spun her theft into my crime. I let her talk, nodding along, until she ran out of steam. Then I leaned forward, my voice low. You sure you want to talk about water, Evelyn? Because I've got footage, logs, and a county inspector who'd love to see where your fountain's hooked up. Her eyes widened, just for a second, before she doubled down. You're bluffing, she snapped. I'll have you sued, arrested, run out of this town. She stormed off, her heels clicking like gunfire on my gravel drive. I closed the door, my heart racing but my resolve firm. She was rattled, and that was good. But her threats weren't empty. Evelyn had connections, HOA allies, friends at the county office, maybe even a lawyer on speed dial. I needed to tighten my defenses. I checked the cameras, backed up every file to a cloud drive, and hid the USBs in a lockbox under my bed. I also called Tom, updating him on the showdown. He laughed. She's panicking. Keep the pressure on. That afternoon, Evelyn escalated. A flyer appeared in every mailbox, including mine, titled Community Alert, Hazardous Neighbor. It didn't name me, but the description, a resident tampering with shared resources, was clear. She called for an emergency HO meeting to address safety concerns. I wasn't a member, but I knew she'd use it to rally her troops. I decided to crash it, not to argue, but to watch, to see how far she'd go. In the meantime, I kept monitoring her. Her sprinklers were off, her pond drained, her lawn yellowing. The sludge had done more than embarrass her, it had crippled her system. But she wasn't giving up. I caught her on camera, late at night, pacing her yard with a flashlight, inspecting the shed. She was looking for the tap, maybe planning to move it. I smiled, knowing my valve was hidden, my tracks covered. She was fighting a war she didn't understand, and I was winning. Evelyn's flyer was just the start. Over the next few days, she unleashed a blizzard of bureaucratic warfare, each move designed to intimidate me into backing down. She posted in the neighborhood's online group, calling me a threat to public health and demanding action. She sent emails to non-HOA residents, urging them to stand together against rogue neighbors. One even landed in my inbox, addressed to resident, with a veiled threat about legal consequences. I saved everything, adding it to my growing dossier. She was digging her own grave, and I was happy to hand her the shovel. On Wednesday, a county even pulled up to her house. 2 inspectors, one with a clipboard, the other with a water testing kit, poked around her yard. Evelyn followed, gesturing wildly, pointing at my property. I watched from my porch, trimming a hedge that didn't need it, my stomach tight. She was trying to pin the sludge on me, claiming I'd contaminated her line. The inspectors spent an hour, taking samples from her pond and fountain, then left without a word. I knew they'd find nothing on my end. My system was clean, the valve sealed, but the audacity of her move stung. The next day, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He was young, polite, clearly uncomfortable. Got a complaint about tampering with plumbing, he said, holding a notepad. I invited him in, offered a soda, and laid out the story. The footage, the logs, the illegal tap. I showed him the valve, now locked, and the stock tank, marked for livestock. He chuckled when I explained the sludge. Sounds like a hell of a prank, he said, scribbling a note. No crime here, but call if she escalates. He left with a wave, and I felt a weight lift. Evelyn's bluff had failed, but she wasn't done. By Friday, she called the HOA meeting. I showed up, uninvited, with a folder of evidence, photos, videos, pressure logs, and a map marking her tap. The rec center was packed, neighbors whispering, Evelyn at the front like a general. She ranted about sabotage and health risks, pointing at me as I stood in the back. I waited, letting her build her case, then handed out my evidence. The room went quiet as people flipped through photos of Ray, read the logs, saw the map. Evelyn tried to interrupt, claiming I'd faked it. But a board member, Clara from the feed store, stood up. I've seen these gauges, she said. This is real. The meeting turned on Evelyn. Neighbors who'd feared her started asking questions. Why was her lawn so green? How'd she afford that fountain? When Ray walked in, unannounced, and admitted she'd paid him to tap my line, the room erupted. Evelyn's face crumpled, her voice cracking as she blamed Ray, the county, anyone but herself. The board voted to suspend her as president, pending a review. She stormed out, cursing, her empire crumbling. I went home, exhilarated but cautious. Evelyn was wounded, not defeated. I checked the cameras, tightened the valve's lock, and waited for her next move. She wasn't the type to quit, and I was ready for whatever she threw next. Evelyn's ousting was the talk of the neighborhood, a seismic shift that left everyone reeling. The online group exploded with memes, cow emojis, sludge jokes, even a photoshopped image of Evelyn holding a muddy hose. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me stopped by, offering coffee, stories, gratitude. Mike brought a pie, saying, "You did what we all wanted to." Sarah, the tricycle mom, admitted she'd cried when Evelyn found her. It felt like a dam breaking, years of resentment pouring out. I listened, nodded, but kept my guard up. Evelyn was down, but she wasn't out. She tried one last stand, hosting a community unity meeting in her driveway. Only a handful showed up, and half left when she ranted about betrayal and freeloaders. I watched from my porch, camera rolling, as her allies dwindled. Her lawn was a wreck, her pond drained, her fountain dismantled after the county flagged it as a health hazard. An invoice from the water board, thick, official, taped to her door, hinted at thousands in fines. She was unraveling, but I knew better than to celebrate too soon. A week later, I got a call from the county. An inspector, Elise, wanted to confirm I wasn't responsible for the sludge runoff. I showed her everything, the valve, the tank, the footage. She was impressed, even amused, and revealed Evelyn's history, previous violations for illegal taps and runoff. This wasn't her first rodeo, just her sloppiest. Elise filed a report, ensuring Evelyn's fines would stick. I thanked her, feeling a quiet pride. I'd not only stopped her, but exposed a pattern. The neighborhood changed after that. The HOA rewrote its bylaws, limiting power, requiring transparency. Meetings became civil, focused on sidewalks and compost bins, not Evelyn's whims. Neighbors started talking, sharing tools, inviting each other over. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, a community healing from a tyrant's reign. Then, one morning, I saw a moving truck at Evelyn's. She was gone by evening, her house dark, her sign in the yard. No goodbye, no apology, just silence. I stood by the fence, the hum of her pump replaced by birdsong, and felt a weight lift. She'd pushed, and I'd pushed back, harder, smarter, dirtier. Evelyn's departure left a void, but it was the good kind, like the silence after a storm. The neighborhood felt lighter, kids biking down streets, gates left unlocked. I fixed the fence where her tap had been, pouring concrete to seal it forever, and added a motion sensor for peace of mind. I didn't expect trouble, but some habits die hard. A month later, the story broke wide. A local blog ran it, Water Wars, Ranchers Sludge Justice, and it spread, picked up by news outlets, even a podcast. People loved it, cheering the underdog, laughing at the sludge. I did a TV interview, keeping it anonymous, focusing on boundaries, not revenge. The attention was strange, but it felt right, like the story had a life of its own. I planted an oak near the old tap, a small, sturdy thing that would outlast us all. It wasn't just a tree, it was a marker, a reminder of what happens when you stand your ground. I hung a sign on the gate, private line. Tamper once, shame on you. Tamper twice, enjoy the sludge. Neighbors chuckled, but the new folks, a young couple with a kid, gave it a nod of respect. They asked about water systems, not HOA rules, and I liked them instantly. The HOA kept improving, organizing cleanups, staying humble. Clara took over as president, her no-nonsense style of bomb after Evelyn's chaos. I stayed out of it, happy to be the guy with the quiet porch, the clean water, the story that wouldn't die. I defended what was mine, not with fists but with patience, proof, and a tank of muck. Out here, where land and labor are everything, that's enough. And that's the tale of the Well of Retribution, folks. A story of water, wrath, and a neighborhood reborn. Thanks for sticking with me through every muddy twist and turn. You're the best audience a storyteller could ask for, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Until then, keep your lines clear and your boundaries firm. Take care.